When a woman ignores you, most men make the same mistake. They assume that more effort will somehow solve the problem. They send another text, they make another call, they look for another excuse to start a conversation. They convince themselves that if they just try a little harder, they'll finally get the response they're hoping for. But in most cases, chasing harder only makes the situation worse. Why? Because when someone chooses not to respond, not to engage, or not to make an effort, your reaction to that silence reveals a lot about your self respect. If every moment of distance causes you to panic, overthink, and pursue even more aggressively, you communicate that your emotional state depends entirely on their attention. And that's never a position of strength. The truth is that silence is communication. People often think communication only happens through words, but actions tell a much clearer story. When someone consistently ignores your messages, delays responses without explanation, or makes little effort to maintain contact, their behavior is already providing information. It may not be the information you want, but it's information nonetheless. The problem is that many men refuse to accept what the silence is showing them. Instead, they create stories. Maybe she's busy, maybe she's confused, maybe she's testing me. Maybe she's waiting for me to try harder. And while any of those possibilities could occasionally be true, constantly searching for explanations often becomes a way of avoiding reality. It allows you to hold on to hope instead of facing what the situation may actually be telling you. That is why one of the most powerful things you can do is stop chasing completely, not to manipulate her, not to punish her, not to make her miss you. Simply to create space for the truth to reveal itself. When you stop sending follow up messages, stop checking in repeatedly, and stop trying to force communication, something important happens. The responsibility shifts. Instead of you constantly creating opportunities for connection, she now has the opportunity to show whether she wants the connection herself. This is where clarity begins. If she values your presence, she'll eventually notice the difference. She'll reach out, she'll make an effort, she'll show some level of investment because people naturally move toward things they genuinely care about. If she doesn't, that tells you something important too. Either way, you win because you finally gain information instead of living in uncertainty. Many men fear doing this because they worry that stepping back will cause her to disappear completely. But think about that for a moment. If the only thing keeping someone in your life is your constant pursuit, then what exactly are you preserving? A genuine connection shouldn't require one person to carry the entire relationship forever. Real interest creates effort. Real curiosity creates action. Real attraction creates participation. When you stop chasing, you allow those truths to become visible. You also regain something incredibly valuable, your peace of mind. Instead of spending every day wondering why she hasn't responded, you stop making her silence the center of your emotional world. You stop measuring your worth by her level of attention. You stop handing over control of your confidence to someone else's behavior. And that shift changes everything because the goal isn't to force her to feel the price of her silence. The goal is to stop paying the price of it yourself. When you stop chasing and allow silence to speak for itself, the truth eventually becomes impossible to ignore. Once you stop chasing and allow her silence to reveal what it needs to reveal, the next step becomes incredibly important. You must become emotionally unavailable to low effort. This doesn't mean becoming cold, bitter, or pretending you don't care. It means refusing to give unlimited emotional access to someone who contributes very little in return. Many men make the mistake of believing that the more attention they give, the more appreciation they'll receive. They think that if they're patient enough, available enough, understanding enough, and consistent enough, eventually the other person will recognize their value and start matching their effort. But that's not always how people work. In fact, when someone receives endless attention, regardless of how little they invest, they often begin taking that attention for granted. Not necessarily because they're cruel, but because human beings naturally become accustomed to what is constantly available. This is why emotional availability must be earned through mutual effort. When a woman ignores your messages, rarely reaches out, shows minimal interest, and contributes very little to maintaining the connection, continuing to pour all of your emotional energy into her only creates imbalance. You become the sole source of investment while she remains the passive receiver. Over time, that imbalance starts affecting you. You begin checking your phone constantly. You overanalyze every interaction. You wonder why she's distant. You search for hidden meanings. You become emotionally attached to tiny moments of attention. Without realizing it, your emotional state becomes dependent on someone who hasn't demonstrated the same level of investment. That is exactly why emotional boundaries matter. A confident man understands that his attention has value, his time has value, his emotional energy has value. He doesn't hand those things out endlessly to people who consistently show him that they're not interested in reciprocating. This isn't about arrogance, it's about self respect. There's a major difference between being available for someone who genuinely cares and remaining emotionally available to someone who repeatedly shows low effort. One builds connection, the other creates emotional exhaustion. When you become emotionally unavailable to low effort, something interesting happens. You stop reacting to every little thing. Her delayed responses no longer control your mood. Her inconsistency no longer dominates your thoughts. Her silence no longer creates panic. Instead, you begin focusing on what actually matters: behavior. You stop listening to promises and start observing actions. You stop asking what she says she feels and start paying attention to what she consistently does. Because at the end of the day, effort is one of the clearest forms of interest. People make time for things that matter to them. They invest in things they value, they protect connections they want to keep. And while nobody is perfect, consistent low effort usually communicates something that words often try to hide. This mindset also protects your confidence. When your emotional well being depends on another person's attention, you place yourself in a vulnerable position. But when your confidence comes from your own standards, your own purpose, and your own self respect, other people's behavior loses the power to control your emotional state. That's where true strength begins. You no longer need constant reassurance. You no longer need validation. You no longer need someone else's attention to feel valuable. And ironically, this is often when people begin seeing you differently, not because you're trying to create a reaction, but because emotional independence is naturally attractive. It signals that you value yourself enough to walk away from situations that fail to meet your standards. Because the moment you stop giving unlimited emotional access to low effort people, you start protecting the one thing that matters most, your self respect. Once you stop giving your emotional energy to someone who consistently ignores you, a powerful shift begins to happen. The attention that was once trapped in frustration, overthinking, and disappointment suddenly becomes available again. And now you face a choice. You can continue wondering why she ignored you, or you can use that same energy to build a life that keeps moving forward with or without her. Most men underestimate how much time they spend mentally focused on someone who isn't investing in them. They replay conversations, they check their phones repeatedly, they imagine different outcomes, they wonder what they did wrong, they think about what they should have said differently. Day after day, their attention stays locked onto a situation they cannot control. The problem is that attention is one of your most valuable resources. Wherever your attention goes, your energy follows, and wherever your energy goes, your life begins to grow. If all of your attention is focused on someone who is ignoring you, then you're essentially investing your most valuable resource into uncertainty. That's a losing trade. A stronger approach is to redirect that energy back into yourself, focus on your health, focus on your goals, focus on your finances, focus on your purpose, focus on becoming the strongest version of yourself. Not because you're trying to prove something to her, not because you're trying to make her jealous, not because you're secretly hoping she'll come back. Do it because your future deserves that investment. One of the most attractive qualities a man can develop is purpose. A man with purpose doesn't spend every day waiting for someone else's attention. He wakes up with goals, he has responsibilities, he has ambitions, he has things that matter to him beyond a single relationship. That doesn't mean relationships aren't important. It simply means they are not the center of his entire identity. When a woman ignores a man who lacks purpose, he often feels lost because so much of his emotional world was attached to her. But when a man has direction, her absence may disappoint him, yet it doesn't stop his life from moving forward. He continues building, he continues growing, he continues progressing, and that mindset changes everything. Imagine two different men. The first spends 6 months obsessing over a woman who ignored him. He continues checking her social media, waiting for messages, replaying old memories, and hoping for signs of interest. The second spends those same 6 months improving his fitness, learning new skills, strengthening his mindset, advancing his career, and creating opportunities for himself. At the end of those 6 months, which man is in a stronger position? The answer is obvious. Growth creates confidence, achievement creates momentum, progress creates self respect, and self respect changes the way you carry yourself. You stop needing constant validation because your confidence comes from the work you've done. You stop feeling desperate for attention because your life becomes filled with meaningful pursuits. You stop seeing one person's silence as a reflection of your worth because you've built a foundation that doesn't depend on someone else's approval. This is where many men discover an unexpected truth. The best response to being ignored isn't revenge. It isn't anger. It isn't trying to force someone to recognize your value. The best response is becoming so focused on your own growth that their silence no longer controls your emotional state. Because when your life is moving forward with purpose, you stop chasing people who aren't choosing you. And once your energy is invested in building a better future instead of chasing unanswered messages, you've already won. As you become more focused on your own growth and stop allowing someone else's silence to dominate your thoughts, another important shift begins to take place. For the first time, she gets the opportunity to experience the absence of your energy. Most men never allow this to happen. The moment communication slows down, they restart it. The moment she becomes distant, they close the distance. The moment silence appears, they rush in to fill it. Because of this, the woman never truly experiences what life feels like without their attention. She never has the chance to notice what their presence was contributing because they are constantly making sure that presence remains available. This is why stepping back can be so powerful, not because you're trying to create emotional pain, not because you're playing games, but because reality deserves room to reveal itself. When someone has grown accustomed to your messages, your support, your consistency, your encouragement, and your attention, those things can quietly become part of their routine. What was once appreciated can become expected. What was once valued can become familiar, and familiarity often hides value. Human beings tend to notice losses more clearly than they notice constant blessings. When something is always available, we stop thinking about it. We assume it will remain there tomorrow because it has always been there before. That assumption changes when the source disappears. Suddenly, the good morning messages are gone, the conversations are gone, the emotional support is gone. The person who consistently showed interest is no longer reaching out. And for the first time, there is space where your presence used to be. That space tells its own story. Many men think their value comes from convincing someone to see it. In reality, value is often recognized most clearly through absence. Not because absence magically creates attraction, but because it removes the constant access that allowed someone to overlook what was there. Think about any meaningful person you've ever lost contact with. Often, it wasn't while they were constantly present that you realized their importance. It was after they were gone. It was when their voice was missing, their energy was missing, their contribution was missing. The same principle applies here. If your presence genuinely added something positive to her life, then your absence creates contrast. Contrast creates awareness. And awareness creates clarity. This is why you should never be afraid of stepping back from one sided situations. If the connection had real value, that value doesn't disappear simply because you stop chasing. In fact, it often becomes more visible. At the same time, this process provides clarity for you as well. Because if your absence changes nothing, if she never notices, never reaches out, never invests, and never makes an effort, then you have learned something important. You have discovered where you truly stand without having to beg for answers. That knowledge is valuable. Far more valuable than months of guessing, far more valuable than endless overthinking, far more valuable than continuing to chase someone who isn't showing equal interest. The goal isn't to make her suffer. The goal is to stop protecting her from the consequences of her own lack of effort. You stop carrying the entire connection. You stop supplying all the energy. You stop making yourself endlessly available. And then you allow reality to do the talking because when your attention, consistency, and presence are no longer guaranteed, people finally get the opportunity to understand what those things were worth. And sometimes the strongest message you can send is the one you send by simply no longer being there. After you've stopped chasing, stopped rewarding low effort, focused on your own growth, and allowed her to experience the absence of your energy, something interesting begins to happen. The dynamic changes, not because you forced it to change, but because you are no longer behaving the way she became accustomed to. Most people pay attention to patterns more than they realize. When someone knows exactly what you're going to do, they stop thinking about it. Your behavior becomes predictable. They expect the text, they expect the call, they expect the quick reply, they expect you to be available whenever they decide to engage. And when expectations become routine, they often lose their emotional impact. Many men unknowingly create this situation for themselves. No matter how long a woman takes to respond, they're still there. No matter how distant she becomes, they're still reaching out. No matter how little effort she gives, they're still available. Over time, she begins expecting that behavior, not because she's intentionally taking advantage of him, but because consistency creates certainty. She knows he will be there. She knows he'll respond. She knows he'll continue investing regardless of what she does. The problem is that certainty without appreciation often leads to complacency. That's why everything changes when you stop being predictable. Suddenly, the behavior she expected no longer appears. The message doesn't arrive. The follow up text never comes. The constant attention disappears. The emotional reactions vanish. And for the first time, she no longer knows exactly what you're doing or how you're feeling. This creates something many men spend months trying to achieve through complicated strategies, clarity. Because when you're no longer providing constant reassurance through your actions, people reveal how much they actually value the connection. If she genuinely cares, she'll notice. She'll wonder why things feel different. She'll become aware of the missing communication. She may even reach out to see what's happening, not because you're playing a game, but because your absence has removed the predictability she once relied on. And if she doesn't react, that provides valuable information too. One of the greatest benefits of becoming emotionally independent is that it exposes reality. You stop hiding the truth behind endless effort. You stop covering up low interest with high investment. You stop creating the illusion of connection through constant pursuit. Instead, you allow people's actions to speak for themselves. Many men fear this because they become attached to certainty, even when that certainty is unhealthy. They would rather continue chasing than risk discovering that the other person's interest isn't as strong as they hoped. But avoiding the truth never improves the truth. In fact, uncertainty often lasts longer when you refuse to allow reality to reveal itself. That's why becoming less predictable is so powerful, not because it manipulates emotions, not because it guarantees a particular reaction, but because it removes the artificial support system that was keeping the dynamic one sided. Now her actions become visible. Does she make an effort? Does she show curiosity? Does she reach out? Does she contribute to maintaining the connection? Those answers matter far more than anything she could ever say because words can create hope, doxes create evidence, and evidence is what allows you to make smart decisions moving forward. The strongest position you can have is one where your happiness no longer depends on controlling someone else's response. Whether she notices your absence immediately, eventually, or not at all, your life continues moving forward. Because the goal was never to become mysterious. The goal was to stop being so predictable that your value became invisible. And when you stop making your attention automatic, people's reactions often reveal exactly where you stand in their lives. After everything we've talked about, stopping the chase, becoming emotionally unavailable to low effort, focusing on your own growth, allowing her to experience your absence, and paying attention to what happens when you stop being predictable, there is one final lesson that brings all of it together. You must move forward whether she returns or not. This is where many men get stuck. They follow all the right steps on the surface, but deep down they are still waiting. They stop texting, but they keep checking their phone. They focus on themselves, but only because they hope she'll notice. They create distance, but secretly expect that distance to bring her back. In other words, their life is still emotionally tied to her decision. And that's not freedom. The truth is that if your happiness depends on whether someone comes back, then you're still giving them control over your emotional state. You may not be chasing physically anymore, but you're still chasing mentally. Real growth happens when you stop building your future around another person's choices. Think about it for a moment. What if she comes back? Great. What if she doesn't? Your life should still be moving in a positive direction. Your goals should still matter. Your purpose should still matter. Your growth should still matter. Your peace should still matter. The strongest men are not strong because they never experience disappointment. They're strong because disappointment doesn't stop them from continuing their journey. Many people make the mistake of treating relationships as the foundation of their entire identity. When things go well, they feel great. When things go badly, everything falls apart. Their confidence rises and falls depending on someone else's attention. That creates emotional instability. A better approach is to build a life that remains meaningful regardless of who chooses to stay or leave. This doesn't mean becoming cold. It doesn't mean pretending relationships don't matter. It simply means refusing to place your entire sense of worth into another person's hands. When a woman ignores you, rejects you, or chooses not to invest, it's easy to interpret that as proof that you're not valuable. But that's a dangerous mindset because your value was never supposed to come from her approval in the first place. Your value comes from who you are, your character, your discipline, your integrity, your purpose, your ability to keep moving forward even when life doesn't go according to plan. When you understand this, something powerful happens. You stop seeing every relationship outcome as a judgment of your worth. Instead, you begin viewing relationships as opportunities for mutual connection. If the effort is there from both sides, great. If it isn't, you accept reality and continue building your life. This mindset removes desperation, it removes neediness. It removes the urge to force things that aren't happening naturally. And ironically, this is often when people become most attractive. Not because they're trying to attract anyone, but because confidence naturally grows when your happiness is no longer dependent on external validation, whether she comes back or not becomes less important because you've built a life that's moving forward either way. You continue improving your health, you continue pursuing your goals, you continue strengthening your mindset, you continue creating opportunities, you continue becoming someone you're proud of, and that's the real victory. Not making her regret ignoring you, not proving a point, not getting revenge. The real victory is reaching a place where someone else's silence no longer has the power to stop your progress. Because when your future is bigger than your attachment to one person, you stop waiting for permission to be happy. And the moment you can genuinely move forward, whether she returns or not, you become impossible to hold back.